Welcome, and thank you for standing by. At this time, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. After the presentation, we will conduct a question-and-answer session. To ask a question at that time, please press star 1. Today's conference is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. I would now like to turn the meeting over to Ms. Lorraine Fernandez. You may begin.
Thank you, Christy. And good morning and good afternoon, everyone. This is our third in our customer series highlighting Master Data Management, MDM. And today, Eric and I are going to talk about big data and master data management, the big benefits this can provide for healthcare. I'm Lorraine Fernandez, Global Healthcare Ambassador, a longtime Initiate employee. We are almost 3 years now into the IBM Information Management and Information Governance part of the software group. Joining me today is Eric Trank. I'm glad Eric could join me. He's Senior Product Manager for InfoSphere MDM, and many of you may know Eric as he was one of the leaders in our service delivery group for years before he moved into his current product management role. So just a little bit of housekeeping for the day. As I said, this is our third in our series. Our first in October was about the Clinical Hub and Master Data Management. You can access those slides through our MDM blog, and we've listed for you the address of how you get to our MDM blog. The second in our series, which was November and hosted by Joaquin Neto and myself, addressed multi-domain MDM and why this is becoming a key imperative due to business transformation and analytics in healthcare. You might also want to access the IBM Big Data blog because we will be talking, as you know, about big data today. And we now have a specific big data blog about big data in healthcare. Last but certainly not least, in continuing this customer series, our next topic will be reference data management as a part of master data management, and we will be scheduling that for early 2013. So we received very positive feedback about these customer-oriented webinars, and we'll be continuing them. So I welcome specifically our customers who represent payers and providers, provinces, consulting organizations who are partners or who have indicated an interest in our software, and we have many other healthcare type organizations represented. So today we have a very diverse audience. We'll try to make sure that our content touches upon each of your areas at least a little bit. If you have questions, please use the chat room to submit those questions throughout the webinar. We will take questions in the last few minutes of the webinar. So those two ways you'll have to ask us questions and to communicate with us. So our agenda today, in the first part I'm going to cover, is specifically big data and healthcare. Eric will talk specifically about the technology of big data and master data management specifically in big data. Throughout this webinar series, we've used this slide and these topics as our platform or foundation. We all know, irrespective of what country we may hail from, and I particularly spend a lot of my time in Asia Pacific, I hear a lot of this even coming from Asia Pacific, and we hear it coming from Europe also. There are a variety of industry challenges that countries and continents and health delivery organizations are facing. Certainly chronic disease is an issue around the globe. It's consuming a lot of resources, whether those are financial resources, whether those tie to the primary care and the nursing shortages. But attacking chronic disease, which is becoming more prevalent, is a major driver to every facet and every organization in healthcare. People talk about the growing cost. It really doesn't matter what country you hail from. While most of you today hail from the U.S., like I do, and I happen to live in Northern California, we all know that 17% of the U.S.'s gross domestic product is going to healthcare. We must control that number in order to be an economy that is competitive in the global world that we have. And we will be talking about how you can begin to address cost with big data initiatives throughout this. And the third thing I point out is that we are becoming a more wellness-oriented society around the world. And we believe big data ties to this, as you can take data from many different locations that currently sits in silos. I think all of this really creates the perfect storm for healthcare, because big data can be a key asset in transforming healthcare, not just incremental changes, but in truly transforming healthcare. So let's spend just a moment talking about the characteristics of big data. Many of you on the call will have heard these previously. They talk about the V's of big data, and depending upon which article you read and which speaker you listen to, the number of V's may vary from anywhere between 3 and 15. But Eric and I today are focusing on the volume, the velocity, the variety, and the veracity of data. As you see on this slide, the volume is going to grow 50-fold over the 10 years from 2010 to 2020. That's pretty staggering in anybody's mind, I think. We talk about the velocity of data, and certainly healthcare sees this with all the sensing and monitoring devices and the fact that we are doing more things around wellness that are things like glucometers, pedometers, and other devices or sensors that are leading to this velocity. And then variety, well, I think personally healthcare has it in spades. We have 80% of the data being unstructured, and yes, the adoption of EHRs may perhaps drop that number to 70%, maybe in my lifetime even to 60%, but we still deal with the vast majority of data historically that is unstructured, and going forward, hopefully it's less. And last, but certainly not least, is the veracity, and this is particularly where MDM comes into play. We must build big data systems and big data platforms and execute big data initiatives with trust. And trust comes from data quality, and it comes from mastering the data so that when it is presented in whatever form or consumed in whatever form, we have trust in that data. So let's talk about the diversity of healthcare data, because as I said, I think we have diversity, I would say even perhaps at a greater level than any other industry has it. We have multiple places where data resides, and unfortunately, it has typically resided in silos. It sits in every format that's probably imaginable to you and I if you've worked in healthcare as long as I have. And today, unfortunately, the analytics is done on a retrospective basis, primarily using the structured data, but the big data creates a lot of opportunities to get rid of those silos and to use the variety of data that is in the healthcare ecosystem today. And I think this is going to create a strong discussion and market drivers around the value that can be derived from big data, because we're going to be able to gain insight through the analytics that can be done with big data to truly transform healthcare. And last but not least, you'll notice there's reference here, and we're going to talk a little bit of it throughout, about social media. We're all well aware that privacy and security are an extremely important issue to healthcare, but that doesn't mean we're immune to social media. Healthcare organizations, whether you're a payer or a delivery organization or even a jurisdiction, are concerned about what the consumers, what the providers, what the members are saying about the quality or the timeliness or the cost of their health care. So big data is going to give us the opportunity to tap all these areas that have previously sat in silos. So just a couple of numbers. If you happen to be someone who likes numbers, here's how these numbers relate to healthcare. We're talking about 150 exabytes as to the volume of data that was stored in 2011, and you heard me earlier say that data is going to grow 50-fold over the next 10 years. So that number, by 2015, multiply that out several-fold, and that'll be the volume we'll be dealing with. The velocity, this example comes from the bedside monitors and in the ICU units, in the neonatal intensive care, and perhaps in trauma centers. And the variety we already talked about. We have every variety that you could imagine, from streaming data to unstructured data to structured data and social media and other types. So we certainly have all the characteristics of big data in healthcare. The challenge to healthcare is really, particularly from a retrospective basis, trying to gather insight to solve the problems we're facing when we're trying to transform healthcare. So the V's, the volume, the velocity, the variety, and the veracity, really can drive insights to addressing the costs, the qualities, and the outcomes that are applied in the number of scenarios or use cases that I've shared with you on this slide. You'll see in the upper left-hand corner, we talk about population management, which is a key item everywhere in the globe that I interact with. They're trying to integrate clinical data, perhaps with pharmacology data, perhaps with e-prescribing data, perhaps with payer data, in order to more quickly and more effectively identify and recommend things like vaccine profiles and administration, just as one example here. So this example of population management can take a lot of different forms based upon who the client is that is undertaking the big data initiative. But we believe that master data management particularly plays a big role in this type of use case because you're going to have to master the patient domain with data coming from a variety of sources. You perhaps are going to apply our householding algorithm so that you can understand who is living in a household in order to better serve that population from a clinical perspective, from a wellness perspective, or perhaps from a marketing or claims management perspective. The other example I point to you is the care management example. Everywhere around the world wants to do better care coordination and care management in order to improve the quality and to reduce the cost. So this means with the big data initiative of data coming from a diverse silos that we have today, we're going to have to, again, master the patient domain or the person domain, which many of you are doing today. Perhaps it's the member domain if you're in a payer-type organization. So, again, you're probably going to have the foundation of mastering the patient or the person or the member domain to begin with as you address these particular use cases in whatever your care setting may be. I like to think that big data creates the world of the possible because right now or historically we've had limitations. But those limitations around the variety of data, the volume of data, those are taken away with the big data and the technology that Eric will talk about that can truly break down the artificial silos that existed historically. So let me share a couple examples. This first one is SUNY Buffalo, which is a major research organization. I think this example really points out a key disease that has long been studied by researchers. This disease has a high cost to patients, to their families, and to society as a whole, as well as to whomever the payer or the reimbursement agency is. So what SUNY Buffalo has done is integrated data across a variety of places with high volumes in order to do research in a matter of hours or days as opposed to months or perhaps even years based upon the data and the technology that was used in years past. I think it's particularly exciting. I happened to see one of the key researchers from this a couple of months ago. It was really heartwarming to hear what they're doing for research and what this can truly mean to consumers. So the next example is what many of you may have seen before, commonly known as Sick Kids in Toronto, Ontario. They're using streaming technology to detect the most subtle change in a neonate's condition in order to more earlier understand what is going on with that infant and to ward off any major illness or incident for these very fragile patient populations. So two good examples of different types of technology, different types of data that's being used that has the potential to really improve quality and control costs. The last example I wanted to use is the diabetic patient from two different perspectives. The diabetic patient from a diagnostic perspective, if you can gather data from all of these different sources, you have the ability to define the diabetic patient who today may not be diagnosed early, and early diagnosis is key to warding off chronic diseases. And from a treatment perspective, the diabetic patient absolutely crosses the entire healthcare ecosystem in getting care, but the care and the data related to the care tend to be fragmented. So with big data, you have the ability to truly create from these variety of sources and the different types of media, such as telemedicine, pedometers, glucometers, the wellness centers, and others. You can integrate this data and truly get that patient-centered view so that care can be more adequately assessed and delivered by this diverse care delivery system. So I think big data has the power to truly transform healthcare, and I'll turn the platform now over to Eric to talk about the technology of big data. And remember, throughout this, you can submit questions via the chat room, and we will open the audio at the very end. So, Eric, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Lorraine. So the technology supporting big data projects is what we call a big data platform. And by platform, we mean a software framework in which big data applications can run. To be successful, the platform will have to provide several types of capabilities. The first is the ability to analyze a variety of information, information such as text, images, or sensor data. Second, it needs the capability to analyze information in motion. So most big data examples that we talk about are for analysis of data at rest, which means data that has been written to a data store. But there are some scenarios which require real-time or on-the-fly analysis. For example, fraud detection where immediate response is required. Another example could be data from sensors or patient monitors. So for these types of use cases, the platform has to be able to analyze information in motion. The third point is the capability to handle extreme volumes of information. This is probably self-evident from the term big data, but it is important here also to consider the platform has to be scalable in a cost-effective way, because over time we would expect many of these use cases to continue to add data, so that we need not just a large amount of data initially, but we expect the volume to grow over time. The fourth point is the capability to discover or experiment. So these are capabilities like text analytics or ad hoc queries or search. And then finally, we need to be able to manage and plan the infrastructure services like security and administration. So these are all part of the big data platform. As you might already be aware, or you probably could guess from the last slide, IBM has a platform for big data that provides the capabilities we just discussed. So IBM's platform consists of several products from the InfoSphere family. I'll talk briefly about a few of them. The Hadoop system is one of the most prominent components. Hadoop is an open source software framework. It includes a distributed file system. And if you're not familiar with Hadoop, it was derived from work that was done at Google and other companies that handle large volumes of data like Facebook and Yahoo. It's highly scalable because it supports running of applications on clusters of hardware. So IBM's productized version of Hadoop is called Big Insights. In the box to the right, labeled Stream Computing, the component we offer to continuously analyze data in motion is called InfoSphere Streams. And then to the right of that, to store structured information, we offer InfoSphere Warehouse and Netezza. At the bottom of this big data platform graphic, you see a box for information integration and governance, and this maps to the information server and MDM products. It may surprise you to see MDM being depicted as part of the big data platform. And the reason that we consider MDM part of big data is that to derive full value from big data, you need to relate the big data to trusted data. And this is a point I want to emphasize, that successful big data projects are supported by MDM. You know, the good news from this message, I think, is that if you already have implemented MDM, you have a foundation and you're actually on your way to implementing a big data platform already. Although the big data platform is a significant amount of technology on its own, it is just a subset of a comprehensive information management architecture. We've included this slide in the presentation to ensure that we keep a view of big data in the overall IM context. You see here the data sources on the left, such as claims and lab data, integrated using protocols like HL7. We've got the data mapping and transport layer flowing the data through to the data warehouse and data marts, and then being exposed through business services and consumed downstream. If we overlay some key IBM products on this diagram, you can see where MDM and Big Insights fit in the architecture. So again, the point here is that big data is part of an overall IM strategy. It's not a separate standalone system. Let's transition now to a deeper discussion of how MDM fits with big data and what can be achieved with these technologies together. Since most of you on the call are MDM customers or business partners, I don't think I need to remind you what master data is. But I would encourage you to think about the full breadth of master data managed by your organization. Most of the examples I personally use when discussing MDM for healthcare revolve around patient data. I might imagine many of you think about patient data first as well. But as we move into an era of big data, other data domains may become important to you in their own right, or become more important in order to analyze relationships with patient data. So the other domains may include providers, products, locations, employees, or other domains that are shown on this slide. So this leads us to one of the primary topics for our session today. How do big data and MDM work together? Specifically, how do you make untrusted data trusted? How do you discover relationships from big data and leverage them for your benefit? Our message is to gain actionable insights from big data, you almost always have to relate the big data to trusted master data in your organization. The perspective I would suggest is that big data analytics need to provide not just insights about patients, but about your patients, or not just about providers, but about your providers. And by your patients or providers, I mean entities that your organization masters and that you can relate to other information. tying unstructured content to structured, trusted content in order to improve insights is the key motivation of linking big data and MDM. The mechanics of relating big data to master data differ by the use case. One approach is to create entities from the big data and link those entities to trusted entities in MDM. Another approach is to search the big data starting with known entities. But in any case, the linkage between the big data and trusted structured data is needed for complete analytics. The insights you gain from big data are most often through analytics. So at the bottom of this slide, you see a continuum which depicts a common path for healthcare organizations maturing or advancing their analytics capabilities. It starts on the left with reporting on transactions. And this is typically manual using spreadsheets. The next step is unifying the data sources and automating the reporting. And basic MDM would fall into this category. The next level is where big data starts to come into play. We call it clinical analytics, and this helps you understand how your organization is running. It could include quality analytics, cost of care, or operational performance. But a key point is that the clinical analytics are retrospective. And finally, on the right, we have advanced analytics. And that is where an organization moves from reactive to predictive. The advanced analytics may include predicting how your actions will impact patient outcomes or efficiency. And the point is that the advanced analytics are different from clinical analytics because the advanced analytics are forward-looking. Okay, let's look at a provider use case. Analytics built on big data can help healthcare providers be more successful and productive, for example, identifying at-risk patients. On this diagram, the data sources on the left include traditional data like account information, but also include data like doctor's notes and correspondence. The big data platform with MDM allows you to create a 360-degree view of the patient, integrate data from multiple sources, and then run statistical analyses. Now, I think we previously said MDM provides the capability of creating a 360-degree view of a patient. And now that we have the ability to incorporate other data sources, we're starting to use the term for MDM to be 360-degree view of the identity when we're talking about MDM alone. But to really get a 360-degree view of a patient, we need to add in the context from these other sources, typically big data sources. And so I think that's another point that I'd like to emphasize is now with the opportunity of big data, the meaning of 360-degree view has really expanded. The outcomes for providers from these capabilities could include the ability to measure and identify causes of adverse events, the ability to predict patients who are at risk for readmission, or to predict patients requiring special intervention. Let's look at the data flow to support these outcomes. On the left, we've got data sources, and these are being ingested into different platforms. You see on the top the structured data being ingested into the MDM system. The integrate and govern box, again, refers to information server and MDM. So the structured data is ingested there and then moved into the data warehouse. That flow is what you may already have in place. The other data sources, like sensor data, is ingested into streams and big insights where it's processed and potentially explored with some additional components of the big data platform that we didn't previously talk about, the Big Sheets and the Visimo Data Explorer. These are parts of the platform that allow for visualization and discovery. The summarized data and patterns are loaded from this channel into the data warehouse as well. Then at the center bottom of the screen, you see Cognos being used for dashboarding and reporting from the data warehouse, while advanced analytics, including predictive analytics, can be performed using SPSS. SPSS is the IBM predictive analytics software. This data is then, this analysis is then made available to users on the right side of this chart to support their work. Now let's look at a payer use case. So clinical analytics built on big data with MDM can help payers identify needed changes to programs, incentives, and business processes. Predictive analytics can help payers identify opportunities to reduce future costs or suggest health programs to a member. The data sources in this scenario include traditional claims data and may also include pharmacy records or device data. Big data analytics enables the payer to construct a 360-degree view of the member and conduct deep analytics across the data sets. The outcomes on the right side of the chart it may include changing incentive programs, creating personalized member communications, or forecasting outcomes based on reimbursement models. At this point, I'll turn the presentation back over to Lorraine to discuss a few more big data use cases and wrap up.
Okay, thanks, Eric. I appreciate that review. I always learn when Eric talks about the technology of big data because I'm a business person. And that really brings us back to our use cases here at the end, because clearly you're not going to undertake a big data initiative just to do some nice, cool analytics in and of itself. You're going to undertake a big data initiative because you have key business challenges that you've been unable to address in the past, and they're important to you, whether you're a payer, a jurisdiction, a provider, or some other type of delivery or consumer organization in the health industry. You're going to do that to advance your business and to better serve your patients or your consumers. We already talked about the patient monitoring example here that is happening at Sick Kids in Toronto. The second example for the medical imaging analytics is being done in Asia, where physicians, specifically radiologists and other specialists, are communicating and analyzing with the big data technology. This saves time, this saves money, this makes resources available to rural areas or areas outside of big cities where most of the specialists are. So this makes a lot of sense to many jurisdictions around the world. Text analytics is a key advanced analytics initiative that is underway in many organizations today because they recognize that 80% of data that sits in unstructured data has a wealth of information beyond what just sits in that structured data. For example, you could have a checkoff box in an EHR, which most U.S. systems would have, that says the patient isn't a smoker, but yet you look in the text of histories and physicals or discharge summaries or consultations that clearly talks about the fact that the patient is a smoker, perhaps their smoking history, perhaps their family history. Other subtle but extremely important details to making patient care safer and more cost-effective and truly providing insights that historically haven't been available. On the upper right-hand corner, you see the example of genomics, and I've talked with a number of customers specifically about this use case, and they say that genomics will be mainstream in the next few years because the cost of undertaking a genetic analysis as a consumer has plummeted over the last 5 years and will continue to drop even further as the technology becomes more effective. So how do we integrate that genomic data with the clinical data, perhaps with the financial data, in order to get the true picture of an individual patient or a population. And certainly in this specific example around genomics, you might be deploying MDM in the patient domain. If you might also be invoking the householding, or perhaps it's a member profile. So MDM will certainly come into play when you think about genomic analytics. The example of unifying research and clinical data probably is pretty obvious because we're taking data that is historically sat within the four walls of an organization, and we are now integrating beyond that specific organization, integrating that clinical data, that research data, very high volumes, perhaps with some velocity because we're going to use sensing data or monitoring data or other types of data such as unstructured. So clearly big data is going to give the ability, like the SUNY Buffalo example, to integrate the research data to make research much more timely and more cost-effective because we can do in hours and days what used to take months or perhaps even years. And it's not just the time, it is the ability to take that outcome data and truly derive insight from it and do transformative things to healthcare, perhaps with some of these chronic diseases like asthma, congestive heart failure, diabetes, as I mentioned earlier, that are becoming, in many countries, at a crisis stage as the population ages, as chronic disease becomes more prevalent, and as resources, particularly in the healthcare ecosystem, get stretched beyond what any country can economically afford. And the last, but certainly not least example of big data in action, and by the way, I should say, these are all real customers that are doing activities with big data initiatives today. So the final one is about fraud and abuse. And we can think whether you're a government agency or a jurisdiction or a payer or perhaps even a provider, the ability to identify fraud and identify waste and therefore take, big dollars out of a healthcare budget that were being squandered perhaps in years past because we didn't have the ability to handle the variety, the velocity, and the volume of data. And certainly in this example, MDM is going to come into play based upon what the scope of the project may be. So I started this discussion out with talking about the fourth V, veracity, and the importance of building trust into your big data initiative with MDM. Certainly building trust means more than just MDM. It means making sure you have high-quality data that your users can therefore believe the results, but it means managing the many domains of MDM as the foundation, that solid platform you're going to build from that Eric showed you earlier, in order to ensure that what you produce with your big data initiative, in fact, is trusted, valued, insightful information. So I'd like to close by just reminding you that this is the third in our webinar series. Eric and I have spent the last 45 minutes sharing with you big data and how it can make initiatives in your organization more effective, truly provide insight and value to your organizations. And I think this is important because healthcare is front and center in the conversations in government, in payers, and in providers. And we certainly have seen that with the recent election in the U.S., and I see it in election conversations around the world. We all acknowledge that healthcare is a rather conservative industry when it comes to investing in IT. So will big data be mainstream tomorrow or the day after tomorrow? No, it won't in healthcare, but it certainly already is being adopted in healthcare. Building trust in your big data initiative, as I said, you will do it through a strong foundation with MDM and other information governance products and priorities like data quality. I like to think that big data in healthcare really creates the world of the possible, because we don't have to say, well, I can't answer that question because the data resides someplace else, or the volume is too much for me to handle, or I don't know how to deal with monitoring data. Big data breaks down all of those artificial barriers and impediments that we had in the past so that it truly is the world of the possible, and big data can be a key tool in driving healthcare transformation, because incremental change in healthcare in many countries isn't enough. We truly do have to transform healthcare in many countries around the world. So we thank you for joining us today. Please follow our blogs where Eric and I and others talk about MDM and big data and other timely healthcare topics. You can contact myself or Eric after this webinar if you have specific questions, or contact your sales exec. And again, please join us in early 2013 for the next webinar, where we're going to talk about reference data management that you might know as code sets and terminology and classification systems and geocodes and much more. We're going to explore that in detail in early 2013, so be looking for an invite in your mailboxes probably in the first half of January for this specific next webinar. So, Operator Christy, you can open the lines for audio questions, and we will take questions, as I said at the beginning, via the chat room. So while Christy, if you want to give the instructions, then I'll take a question from the chat room while we key them up on audio.
Thank you. If you would like to ask a question over the phone, please press *1 on your touch-tone phone. Please remember to unmute your phone and record your name clearly when prompted. You may withdraw a question by pressing *2. One moment, please.
So I do have a couple of questions in the chat room, Eric, for you or I. The first one says that you and I talked about domains for big data, but specifically in conversations we're having, what domains beyond patient do we typically see come up in conversations? And I'll take the first stab at that question. I think of a few conversations I've had in the last 45 days around this, and I think the number one topic I hear surfacing when we talk multi-domain in the context of advanced analytics or big data would be the issue of location, and I hear those discussions both in the U.S. and in Canada and in a couple of countries in Asia Pacific. And I think the reason location surfaces is because people want to know where organizations are physically located, where providers practice, how that relates to clinical data, how that relates to financial data, and then how you understand that in the broader context of patient-centric or provider-centric, or in the case of payer, maybe member-centric data. So location would be the number one thing I think I'd say. Eric, any other thoughts you have?
Yeah, Lorraine, I would agree with you. I think the locations or facilities would certainly be, one that would be high on the list. It's going to be driven a lot by, for each organization, what the priority or roadmap is for rolling out these types of analytics that we discussed. But there's certainly a lot of important analytics that are going to depend on having a trusted view of the locations. I think products and employees are also domains that, again, depending on the analytics, may also come into play.
Okay. So Christy, I have one more question in the chat room, but I'll let you tell us if we have any calls on the phone.
There are no questions over the phone.
Okay, then we'll go to the second question in the chat room that perhaps I answered a little bit, but I'll expand on it. It says, do you see big data becoming real in healthcare? Yeah, it is becoming real in healthcare, and I think some of the examples that I shared and the use cases that Eric shared illustrate that big data is becoming real. Admittedly, it is going to be the larger organizations who have both the business processes and the financial resources to do big data initiatives. I think there will also be jurisdictions and particularly government agencies that have huge volumes of data that will undertake big data initiatives, particularly to address fraud and abuse. But like I said, it won't happen tomorrow, but it's going to be the larger organizations who will be the leaders and demonstrate value early on, and then it will become more mainstream in years ahead. Eric, any perspective there?
Yes, I think, as you said, at this point, it's the larger organizations that are moving forward quickly with these initiatives. What I'm seeing is certainly a lot of interest among all organizations. I think recognition that big data is a significant change in the industry that is creating a lot of opportunities. So although we don't have all of the organizations immediately moving forward with a big data project, I think we do have a very broad base of organizations that are asking us for information and perhaps contemplating opportunities they have, even if they're not ready to move forward with them right now.
And I think the other thing, Eric, that I'm hearing, and I'm betting you are, is in the context of MDM as the foundation for big data initiatives, I have had countless discussions in the last 60 days with customers who are talking about, well, how do we understand relationships of data? And although some of those conversations have happened in the past, a lot more of them, but more importantly, what about the hierarchy of our data? And I had very few questions and conversations around hierarchy of data in healthcare until the last, I'd say, 4 or 5 months. So, operator, do we have any questions on the line?
There are no questions at this time.
Then I don't see any more questions in the chat room, so I thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to discussing reference data management with you in early 2013. Thank you much.
Thank you for participating on today's conference. The conference has concluded. You may disconnect at this time.